The door didn't slam. That was the worst part. Seo-Yun simply closed it, quietly, with the particular finality of a man who had already made up his mind 3 days ago and was only now getting around to the announcement. Ji-Hoon stood in the corridor of Deck 5 with his overnight bag hanging from one fist and the sound of that soft click echoing somewhere behind his ribs. Too reserved. Too hard to reach. Too much work for a vacation. 3 sentences. That was all it took to end 14 months. He didn't cry. He was very good at not crying. Had been since he was 19 and first understood what it meant to be an Omega in a world full of men who confused patience with submission. He shifted the bag to his other hand, squared his shoulders, and turned to face a corridor that offered him absolutely nothing. No open door, no sympathetic face, no plan. What it did offer him, without warning from around the far corner, was a scent. Cold. Still. Old in the way that certain silences are old. Ji-Hoon stopped walking. For the first time in years, his body did something without asking him first. It stayed. Before I tell you what happens next, subscribe to Starry-Eyed Lovers and tell me where you're watching from. The argument had started over breakfast. Not loudly. Seo-Yun didn't do loud, which was one of the things Ji-Hoon had once found sophisticated about him and now recognized as something closer to cowardice. It had started with a comment about the way Ji-Hoon held his coffee cup with both hands. And then somehow, with the particular gravity of grievances that have been quietly stockpiled for months, it had pulled everything else down with it. By the time they returned to the cabin after the afternoon deck gathering, the air between them had the specific weight of a conversation that was no longer a conversation. Seo-Yun opened the cabin door and held it. Not for Ji-Hoon. Just open, the way you hold a door when you want someone to understand they are leaving. I think we both know this isn't working. Ji-Hoon set his jacket on the chair near the porthole. We're in the middle of the ocean. I'm aware. So whatever this is, Ji-Hoon turned, keeping his voice level, keeping his face the careful neutral he had perfected over years of not giving people the reaction they were angling for. It can wait until we dock. Seo-Yun shook his head slowly, with the patient expression of someone delivering a verdict they'd rehearsed. I don't think it can. I've been trying to connect with you for over a year, Ji-Hoon. An actual connection. And he paused, and it was the pause that did it, the one that meant he was choosing his words for maximum precision rather than maximum kindness. You don't let anyone in. You're exhausting to read. You're closed off in a way that honestly feels deliberate, and I'm done treating it like a project. Ji-Hoon said nothing. This was, he understood distantly, the correct response. Any words he offered right now would be catalogued as evidence. He was aware, too, of the 3 people in the corridor. He had noticed them when Seo-Yun opened the door, a couple and their friend heading toward the upper deck bar, slowing now with the magnetic instinct of strangers who sense a scene unfolding. One of them had the decency to look away. The other 2 did not. You're not even going to argue, Seo-Yun said, and he sounded almost disappointed. Would it change anything? A pause. No. Then there's nothing to argue. Seo-Yun stepped back from the door and Ji-Hoon understood, with a clarity that felt very clean and very cold, that the conversation was over. He picked up his overnight bag from the floor by the bed. He had not fully unpacked, a habit, something he'd never examined too closely, and he walked out. The door closed behind him. Softly. Of course it did. The couple in the corridor moved on. The friend lingered half a second longer than necessary before following. Ji-Hoon stood with his bag in his hand and the recycled air of Deck 5 pressing against his face and counted, silently, to 4. He was furious. Not the kind of fury that wanted to break something. That would have been easier, would have given him somewhere to put it. This was the other kind. The kind that sits in the sternum like a coal and radiates outward with nowhere to go. Because there is no one to be furious at, not really. Because Seo-Yun had said things that were technically true and Ji-Hoon was standing in a corridor with a bag he'd half-packed before the trip even started, and both of those facts pointed in a direction he wasn't ready to look. He started walking. The purser's desk was on Deck 3. He knew that from the embarkation packet he'd actually read, because he read everything, because being prepared was the closest thing he had to feeling safe. He took the stairs rather than the elevator, needing the mechanical rhythm of movement, needing his body to have something to do while his mind performed its quiet, airless damage assessment. 14 months. He turned the number over. It didn't feel like loss so much as recalibration, a scale re-zeroing after too long measuring the wrong thing. The suppressant patch on the inside of his left wrist had been applied that morning and was already feeling thinner than it should. He pressed 2 fingers against it briefly, a habit, a check. Still holding. Barely. He was an Omega who passed. Most people didn't know, and he had worked very hard to keep it that way. The patches, the scent-neutral products, the careful management of environments and stress levels. The yacht had seemed safe enough for a long weekend. Controlled setting. Private company. Seo-Yun had known, obviously, and had never weaponized it, which Ji-Hoon had counted as a form of respect and was now reclassifying as the bare minimum. He reached the Deck 3 landing and pushed through the interior door. The purser's desk was staffed by a woman with efficient eyes who listened to his situation with the practiced calm of someone who had navigated passenger crises before. She typed. She cross-referenced. She typed again. Ji-Hoon watched her face and read the answer before she offered it. "I'm so sorry, Mr. G. We're at full occupancy for this sailing. There are no alternative cabins available at this time. None. None, I'm afraid. I can put you on a priority list in case anything changes, but realistically," she glanced at the screen, "with only 31 hours remaining in the voyage, the likelihood is quite low." 31 hours. Ji-Hoon absorbed this. He was a man who prided himself on solving problems before they required help, and he was standing at the desk of the one person on this vessel who could help him and being told, politely, that help was unavailable. "Is there a common area I can?" "The lounges are accessible overnight, yes. Though I should mention they're not temperature-controlled the same way the cabins are, and with the weather system moving through tonight." "That's fine," Ji-Hoon said. "Thank you." He turned away from the desk before she finished her sentence. Not rudeness, just the need to stop receiving information he hadn't asked for about how thoroughly his situation had collapsed. He took the long corridor back toward the central atrium, passing a row of porthole windows where the sea outside had shifted from blue to a deeper, more serious gray. The weather system. He hadn't noticed the light changing. He noticed it now. His bag was not heavy. He had always traveled light, which Seo-Yun had once called elegant and Ji-Hoon had privately known was just the old, trained instinct of someone who didn't fully trust any situation to last. Travel light. Stay ready. Never unpack completely into a space that isn't yours yet. He stopped at the end of the corridor. The atrium opened ahead of him into warm amber light. The yacht's interior was beautiful in the way of things designed to make people feel they had arrived somewhere. He had not arrived anywhere. He was suspended between a closed door and 31 hours of open water with a bag in his hand and a suppressant patch that had maybe 12 hours left in it if he was lucky. He pressed his back against the wall. Just for a moment. Just to stop moving. The scent reached him before the footsteps did. Cold. Still. Something underneath it that was neither of those things. Something that moved in the opposite direction of every alpha scent Ji-Hoon had ever learned to brace against. He didn't recoil. He didn't calculate an exit. He went completely, incomprehensibly still. And around the corner, unhurried, carrying nothing, came Kang-Joon. He was taller than Ji-Hoon had registered from the scent alone. That was the first thing, the sheer vertical fact of him, the way he occupied space without appearing to try. He wore a white shirt with the sleeves pushed to the forearms and dark trousers, and he looked like someone who had decided some years ago that he would never again wear anything that required effort to justify. No jewelry. No watch that announced itself. Just the clothes and the stillness and the eyes that found Ji-Hoon in the half-second before Ji-Hoon could arrange his face into something appropriate. Ji-Hoon had walked directly into his chest. Not a brush, a full collision, the kind that happens when you are moving fast and not watching the corner, and the person coming the other way is built like something that does not yield. Ji-Hoon's bag swung. His shoulder caught. One hand came up on instinct to push back against whatever he'd hit, and what he'd hit was warm and solid, and did not move even slightly. A hand closed around his upper arm. Not gripping, steadying, the way you steady something you don't want to fall. It was there for exactly 2 seconds, and then it was gone. "Careful," the man said. One word. Low, unhurried, with the particular texture of a voice that was accustomed to not repeating itself. Ji-Hoon stepped back and recalibrated. He was not a person who flustered. He had worked very hard to not be a person who flustered. But something about the scent this close was making his nervous system behave in ways that were not entirely under his supervision. Cold pine, yes, and beneath it something earthen and old, like stone that had been in shadow for a very long time. His suppressant patch registered it and did absolutely nothing useful. I wasn't watching the corner, Ji-Hoon said. His voice came out level. He was grateful for that. No, the man agreed, without accusation. A beat of silence opened between them. The man did not fill it. He simply stood with his hands at his sides and looked at Ji-Hoon with an expression that was not quite neutral. Neutral implied the absence of something, and this was more like the presence of patience, which was different and considerably more unnerving. I'm fine, Ji-Hoon added, because the silence had gone on long enough to start meaning something. I know, the man said. You're holding your bag correctly, and your footing is steady. You're fine. Ji-Hoon looked at him. That's a strange thing to notice. Probably. The man's gaze moved briefly to the overnight bag in Ji-Hoon's hand, then back up. Not assessing, just observing, the way someone looks at a thing when they're filing it away without comment. You came from the purser's desk. It wasn't a question, which was somehow more irritating than if it had been. How would you know that? This corridor only connects 2 places from this direction. The purser's desk and the engine access stairwell. The man paused. You don't look like someone who got lost near the engine room. Despite everything, despite the bag and the patch and the 31 hours and Seo-Yun's carefully chosen words still sitting in his sternum like a splinter. Ji-Hoon almost said something that would have functioned as a laugh. He stopped it in time. My cabin situation changed, he said, which was the most compressed version of the truth he could manage. There's no availability on the ship. The man absorbed this with no visible reaction. Where are you sleeping tonight? The lounge, apparently. Another silence. This one felt different. Not empty but occupied, the way a room feels when someone is thinking rather than waiting. Ji-Hoon became aware that he had given personal information to a stranger he'd known for approximately 90 seconds and should probably be moving along. I have a suite, the man said. Deck 6. 2 rooms. Ji-Hoon looked at him steadily. No. The second room has its own lock. The man said it without inflection, without the particular salesman's energy of someone trying to convince. Just information offered flatly, take it or don't. I don't know you. Kang-Joon, the man said. Now you know my name. That's not what I meant. I know what you meant. He held Ji-Hoon's gaze. There was nothing in his eyes that Ji-Hoon could identify as angle or agenda, which was itself a kind of angle, Ji-Hoon supposed, except that he was good at reading people, and what he was reading here was something that did not fit any category he'd prepared for. The lounge will be cold tonight. The weather system coming through is significant. You'd sleep in a chair. I've slept in worse. Probably, Kang-Joon said again, with the same mild tone, and somehow this acknowledgement, not a contradiction, not a performance of concern, landed differently than reassurance would have. He wasn't trying to talk Ji-Hoon into anything. He was just standing there, stating facts, leaving the architecture of the decision entirely in Ji-Hoon's hands. Which was exactly why Ji-Hoon didn't trust it. Thank you, Ji-Hoon said, with the finality he'd developed over years of ending conversations that needed ending. I'll manage. Kang-Joon nodded once. Not offended, not deflated. Just accepting, the way you accept weather. He stepped to the side to let Ji-Hoon pass. Ji-Hoon walked past him and back toward the atrium. He made it approximately 40 meters before his phone buzzed. The ship's guest services app, he downloaded it during embarkation, because he always downloaded the relevant app, because preparation was safety. A notification. Your accommodation inquiry has been reviewed. We regret to confirm no alternative cabins are available for the duration of this sailing. Lounge access has been arranged. For comfort items, please contact the front desk. He stopped walking. Read it twice. Then he stood in the corridor for a moment with his phone in his hand, and the gray sea visible through the porthole beside him, and the weather system presumably moving closer at whatever speed weather systems moved. He turned around. Kang-Joon was still there. He hadn't moved, was standing exactly where Ji-Hoon had left him, not watching the direction Ji-Hoon had gone, just existing in the corridor with the same unhurried quality as before, as if time passed differently around him and he had simply decided not to mind. He looked up when Ji-Hoon came back. Said nothing. The second room has its own lock, Ji-Hoon said. Yes. I'm not. This is a logistical arrangement. Because there's no other option. Correct, Kang-Joon said. And you want nothing in exchange for it. The man looked at him for a long moment. Not considering the answer, he already had it. Considering, Ji-Hoon thought, whether to be offended by the question, and then deciding with visible equanimity that he wasn't. I want nothing in exchange for it, he said. You can leave whenever the situation changes. You don't owe me conversation or company or gratitude beyond whatever you feel is appropriate. Ji-Hoon studied him. The scent was steadier from here. Not weaker, but somehow easier to stand inside of, like adjusting to a temperature. His patch was holding. Barely. Fine, Ji-Hoon said. Kang-Joon simply turned toward the elevator and pressed the call button. He didn't gesture for Ji-Hoon to follow, didn't check to see if he was coming, didn't perform any of the small social rituals of a man who had just won something. Ji-Hoon followed anyway. The elevator doors opened. They stepped inside. The doors closed, and the scent of cold pine filled the small space completely, and Ji-Hoon fixed his eyes on the panel of floor numbers and reminded himself, clearly, firmly, that this was a logistical arrangement. His patch said nothing. His pulse said something else entirely. The suite was obscene. Not in the way of things that try too hard, not gold fixtures or mirrored ceilings, or the performative excess of wealth that needed to be witnessed to justify itself. It was obscene in the quieter, more disorienting way of spaces that have been designed with such precise attention to comfort that walking into them felt like a physical exhale. Warm wood paneling. A wide window that ran the full length of the outer wall, currently showing nothing but open gray sea and the last of the afternoon light dissolving into cloud cover. A sitting area with 2 chairs angled toward the view. A bed, visible through the open interior door, that was made with the kind of linen that had no business existing on a vessel moving through salt water. Ji-Hoon stood in the entrance and catalogued all of it in approximately 4 seconds and prepared, on instinct, to find something wrong with it. He couldn't find anything. Kang-Joon set a key card on the console table near the door without ceremony. That one is yours. It opens the main suite and the second room. He moved toward the interior and pushed open a narrower door on the left wall. Not the bedroom door, a different one Ji-Hoon hadn't immediately registered. I'll be in here. Ji-Hoon looked at the door. It was visibly smaller than the main bedroom. That's the adjoining room. Yes. You were already in the main room. I was, Kang-Joon said, with the same undecorated simplicity he applied to everything. He was already moving, lifting a jacket from the chair in the sitting area, picking up what appeared to be a book from the side table, transferring both through the narrower door with the efficiency of someone who had made the decision before the conversation started and saw no reason to perform it as generosity. The main room has a better window. You should use it. Ji-Hoon watched him do this. I'm not taking your room. Kang-Joon paused in the doorway and looked back at him. You already have. I've moved. A beat. The lock on your side engages with the keycard. From inside, there's also a manual bolt. He said this without emphasis, not reassurance, just specification, the way you tell someone where the light switch is. Then he stepped through and pulled the door to, not fully closed, just resting. Ji-Hoon stood in the suite alone. He stayed like that for a moment, bag in hand, waiting for the shape of the situation to make sense in a way that didn't require him to revise anything he thought he understood about how people operated. It didn't comply. He set the bag down near the console table, walked to the bedroom door, and looked at the main room properly. The bed was large. Unreasonably large for a vessel, even one this size. The window here was indeed better, wider lower, so that lying down you would see nothing but sky and sea, the horizon line splitting the view cleanly in two. There was a reading lamp on the left side table. Someone had already turned it on, which meant it had been on before he arrived, which meant Kang-Joon had been in here with the lamp on, reading or thinking or simply existing in a room that was now, through some inexplicable sequence of events, Ji-Hoon's. He sat on the edge of the bed. Not lying down, just sitting, the way you sit when you need a surface to hold you while you think. The mattress received him without comment. Through the window the sea had gone fully gray now, moving in long, slow swells that were visible even from this height, the first suggestion of the weather system making itself known. He pressed 2 fingers to his suppressant patch. Still there. Thinner. From behind the adjoining door, nothing. No movement, no sound, no sense of a presence organizing itself around him. The suite was, as advertised, quiet. Genuinely quiet. Not the performative quiet of a space trying to signal luxury, but the real kind, where the absence of noise felt like something you could lean against. Ji-Hoon was not accustomed to receiving things without understanding the terms. He had been in Omega and professional spaces long enough to know that generosity was rarely structureless. It came with architecture, with invisible expectation, with the particular weight of a debt that no one would ever formally name, but everyone would eventually collect. Seo-Yun had been generous too, in the beginning. Patient. accommodating. And then gradually, he had begun to present invoices. Not in words. Seo-Yun was too precise for that. But in size, in the weighted way he'd sometimes look at Ji-Hoon across a room, in comments about how much easier things would be if Ji-Hoon were just slightly less himself. She door hadn't slammed. It had closed softly. And that was the whole of it. Ji-Hoon looked at the adjoining door. A man he had met 40 minutes ago had given him the better room, relocated himself without discussion, specified the location of the bolt, and then gone completely quiet. No checking in. No pointed silences designed to be acknowledged. No performance of sacrifice requiring an audience. He was trying to locate the mechanism. The part where this made sense as a transaction. He was good at locating mechanisms. It was what he did in his professional life, standing in front of objects centuries old and tracing the logic of their making, understanding not just what a thing was but why it was built the way it was, what problem it solved, what the maker understood about the person who would eventually stand in front of it. He couldn't find the mechanism. What kind of alpha voluntarily takes the smaller room? The thought arrived plainly and sat there, refusing to be rhetorical. He genuinely did not know. Every alpha he had navigated, professionally, personally, in the gray spaces in between, had operated with some version of the same underlying architecture. Space was claimed, comfort was allocated, and the omega in the room adjusted accordingly, pleasantly, as though the adjustment were a preference rather than a calculation. Ji-Hoon had adjusted so many times and in so many directions that he had eventually stopped noticing he was doing it. Had started somewhere along the line calling it independence. Calling it not needing things. Seo-Yun had called it being closed off. He lay back on the bed without deciding to. Just let gravity make the choice, one hand resting on his sternum, eyes on the ceiling. The lamp made a warm circle on the wall beside him. The sea moved outside the window with its slow, indifferent rhythm. He was exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. The door to the adjoining room remained exactly as Kang-Joon had left it, resting, not latched, a gap of perhaps 3 centimeters. Through it came nothing. No sound, no scent, no signal of any kind. Just the quiet awareness that someone was on the other side of it, doing whatever they were doing, requiring nothing. Ji-Hoon reached over without sitting up and pressed the manual bolt with 2 fingers. Felt it engage. Solid, immediate, no give. Then he lay back and stared at the ceiling for a long time, listening to the sea, trying to decide if the thing sitting in his chest was the remnant of Seo-Yun's words or something else entirely. Something newer and considerably less explicable. Outside, the first real wind of the weather system moved across the water. Inside, the suite held its quiet. He did not figure out what kind of alpha gives up space voluntarily. But somewhere between one slow swell and the next, still dressed, bag unopened, bolt engaged, Ji-Hoon fell asleep. Before I tell you what happens next, subscribe to Starry-Eyed Lovers, and tell me where you're watching from. He woke to light. Not the aggressive morning light of a room with east-facing windows and no curtains. He had lived in that apartment for 2 years in Busan and never forgiven it. But something gentler, diffused through cloud cover, the kind of light that arrived without insisting on itself. The sea outside the window was calmer than it had been the night before. The weather system had moved through while he slept and left the water flat and pewter gray and oddly still. Ji-Hoon lay on his back for a moment and took inventory. He was still dressed. His shoes were off, which he didn't remember doing, though he supposed his body had managed that much on its own. The bolt on the adjoining door was still engaged. The lamp was still on, which meant he had slept through the night with it burning, which was the kind of thing he would normally find intolerable and had apparently not noticed at all. He sat up, pressed his fingers to the suppressant patch, holding just. It would need to be changed by early afternoon at the latest. He had 1 spare in his bag, which he was now grateful he'd packed with the same over-prepared instinct that Seo-Yun had once called endearing and later called excessive. He stood, straightened his clothes, and opened the bedroom door. The suite was empty. Both the sitting area and the entrance empty. The adjoining room door was open now, resting the same 3 centimeters as the night before but from the other side, which meant Kang-Joon had unbolted it from his room at some point. And that should have been alarming but wasn't, which was its own kind of information. The balcony door was open. Not wide, just enough to let in the cool morning air, which carried salt and something quieter underneath it. Ji-Hoon crossed the sitting area and pushed the door fully open. Kang-Joon was standing at the balcony rail with a cup of tea. Not sitting, standing, one hand on the rail, the other holding the cup, looking out at the water with the focused, unhurried quality of someone who had been awake for some time and had decided to spend that time simply looking at the sea. He was wearing a different shirt. His hair was still neat. He gave no indication of being surprised by the door opening. "Morning," Ji-Hoon said. "Morning," Kang-Joon said without turning. Ji-Hoon stepped onto the balcony. The air was cool enough to notice, not cold, but present, the kind of morning temperature that required acknowledgement. There was a second cup on the small balcony table, still steaming. He looked at it. "I didn't know if you'd want it," Kang-Joon said. "You can leave it." Ji-Hoon picked it up. It was some variety of oolong. He could tell from the color and the particular way the steam smelled, slightly floral, not aggressively so. He took one sip and stood beside the table and looked at the sea alongside Kang-Joon without saying anything for a moment. "This is very particular tea," he said finally. "Yes. For a yacht. I travel with it." Ji-Hoon considered this. "That's a little pretentious." There was a pause. A short one. And then something happened to Kang-Joon's face. Not a smile exactly, not with teeth, not performed, just a slight shift at the corner of his mouth, a fractional softening that lasted approximately 1.5 seconds before it was gone. It was the most contained expression of amusement Ji-Hoon had ever witnessed, and somehow, inexplicably, it was also the most unsettling thing he'd seen in recent memory. Like catching a glacier move. "Probably," Kang-Joon said. Ji-Hoon looked back at the sea. He took another sip of the pretentious tea, which was objectively very good. They stood like that for a while. The yacht moved beneath them with a slow, almost imperceptible rhythm, and the morning held its gray and silver quality, and neither of them felt compelled to fill the air with anything. Ji-Hoon was aware that this should have been uncomfortable, standing on a balcony with a man he'd met the previous afternoon, in borrowed space, with his life in a temporary state of mild collapse. And it wasn't. It was just quiet. He didn't know what to do with that. "I should say something about the room," he started. "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to. I'm choosing to." He kept his eyes on the horizon. "Thank you. For the room and for—" He paused, selecting the right word with the care of someone who understood the weight of them. "The bolt specification." Kang-Joon nodded once, accepting rather than receiving, which was the correct distinction. He didn't say of course, or it was nothing or any of the things that would have required Ji-Hoon to perform gratitude in response to perform generosity. He just nodded and drank his tea. Ji-Hoon decided, in that moment, on the terms. "I don't want to talk about why I was in the corridor," he said. "Or who I was with. Or any of it." "Fine. And I don't want," he considered how to say it without making it strange. "The other thing. The management. Where people decide you're fragile and start handling you." Kang-Joon turned his head and looked at Ji-Hoon directly for the first time since he'd stepped onto the balcony. His expression was the same as it had been the previous afternoon. That steady, unhurried attention that felt less like being watched and more like being accurately perceived, which was somehow worse and also considerably better. "You're not fragile," he said. It wasn't reassurance. It was just an observation, plainly stated. "I know that," Ji-Hoon said. "I need you to also know it." "I do. A beat." "And the touching thing," Ji-Hoon said. He said it evenly, the way he would state any logistical preference, because he had learned long ago that the more normally he said it, the less it became a thing that required management. "I don't. Casual contact is complicated for me. I'll tell you if something is all right. I won't assume you understand without being told, so I'll tell you." Kang-Joon absorbed this. His gaze didn't shift. "Understood. It's not about you specifically." "I know. I just want to say that clearly." "You have," Kang-Joon said, without impatience, without the particular weariness of a man who felt he was being over-explained to. He said it the way he said most things, as though the words were simply accurate and accuracy was sufficient. Ji-Hoon looked at him for a moment longer than he intended to. Then he looked back at the sea. They finished their tea standing at the rail with a foot of balcony space between them, watching the flat gray water catch the first pale suggestion of sun coming through the cloud cover. A container ship was visible in the far distance, moving in the opposite direction, enormous and slow and indifferent. Ji-Hoon's mind, which was usually engaged in some form of low-level narration, cataloging, assessing, preparing, was quiet. Not empty, but quiet. The way a library is quiet, full of things and still. He didn't examine it. He just stood in it, cup in both hands, the pretentious oolong cooling by degrees, and let the morning be whatever it was. Eventually Kang-Joon went inside to refill his cup. He didn't ask if Ji-Hoon wanted more. He came back 2 minutes later with both cups filled, set Ji-Hoon's on the rail within reach, and returned to his position without comment. Ji-Hoon picked it up. The second cup was better than the first. He found it by accident. After the second cup of tea, he had retreated to the main room to change his suppressant patch. The old one was down to almost nothing, the edges lifting where the adhesive had given up, and then spent 20 minutes doing the kind of careful, methodical unpacking that he had not done the night before. Not because he trusted the situation more, because unpacking was something to do with his hands while his mind ran its quieter operations. He hung the 2 shirts he'd brought. He set his book on the nightstand. He did not look at his phone beyond turning the screen over to confirm it had charged overnight, which it had. Seo-Yun had not messaged. This was unsurprising and also, when he sat with it for a moment, clarifying. He left the suite at 9:30 with no particular destination, which was unusual for him. He moved through spaces with intention, had always found aimlessness faintly destabilizing. But the yacht was finite and his options were accordingly limited. He took the interior staircase down to Deck 2, which the embarkation packet had listed under amenities as cultural and wellness, a pairing that had struck him as optimistic at the time. The wellness portion appeared to be a small spa with frosted glass doors and the kind of ambient sound that seeped under doorways. The cultural portion was 3 panels of exhibition space at the far end of the corridor, currently occupied by a rotating installation that the placard described as a collaboration between a Seoul-based sculptor and a Jeju Island ceramicist. 8 pieces total. The lighting was better than it had any right to be on a moving vessel, focused, warm, the kind of installation lighting that understood its job was to present the work rather than announce itself. Ji-Hoon stopped in front of the first piece and felt something in his chest quietly rearrange itself. It was a bronze figure, small, maybe 30 centimeters, of a person in the act of covering their own face with both hands. Not dramatically, not in grief, or not only in grief. The hands were too deliberate for grief. They were the hands of someone who had made a choice about what to show and what not to show, and the figure's posture, the set of the shoulders, the slight forward lean, suggested that this was not a new choice. It was a practiced one. The plinth beneath it read, "After everything, still standing." No artist name attached to the piece. No date. Ji-Hoon stood in front of it for a long time. He was aware, at some point, of a presence at the entrance to the installation space. He didn't turn. He knew the scent now, cold pine, that older thing beneath it, and he knew from the previous day that it would not crowd him, would not approach beyond whatever distance he implicitly established. He continued looking at the bronze figure. "The hands are wrong," he said, not loudly. Almost to himself, which was how he talked when he was thinking and forgot to think privately. Technically, if you look at the finger proportions relative to the palm, the sculptor compressed them, which makes the hands look more deliberate than anatomically accurate hands would. No response. He took that as permission to continue. It's a choice. You make the hands slightly wrong on purpose because correct hands would look relaxed, and these hands are not relaxed. The compression makes them read as intentional. Controlled. He tilted his head slightly. It changes the whole emotional register of the piece. Correct hands would make this figure look like they're hiding. These hands make them look like they're deciding. He moved to the next piece. This one was ceramic, a tall, narrow vessel with a crack running its full height, the crack filled with what appeared to be gold lacquer. Kintsugi technique, Japanese in origin, applied here to a form that was distinctly Korean in its proportions. He found this interesting. The conversation between traditions, neither one consuming the other. "Do you know the philosophy behind this?" he asked, still not turning around. From behind him, at what he estimated was about 4 meters. The break becomes part of the object's history. His voice was the same as it had been on the balcony. Low, unhurried, nothing added to it that wasn't necessary. Ji-Hoon nodded. "Most people get it slightly wrong," Ji-Hoon said. "They say the cracks are what make it beautiful, which sounds right but misses the point. It's not that the damage is beautiful. It's that the repair is honest. You can see exactly where the thing broke and exactly where it was put back together. There's no pretending it didn't happen." He paused. "That's different from calling damage beautiful. That's just accuracy." Silence. Then, yes. One word, and it landed with a weight that suggested Kang-Joon had understood the distinction immediately and found it correct, and had nothing to add because it didn't require addition. Ji-Hoon moved to the third piece. This one he spent less time on, an abstract ceramic form that was technically accomplished but emotionally inert, the kind of work made by someone who understood craft completely and feeling partially. He noted it without judgment and moved on. The fourth piece stopped him. It was another bronze, larger this time, of two figures standing near each other. Not touching. The space between them was deliberate. You could see it was deliberate in the way the sculptor had given each figure its own weight, its own completed posture, so that neither was leaning toward the other. They were simply near. Proximate without being entangled. The plinth read voluntary adjacency. Ji-Hoon looked at it for a long time without speaking. He heard Kang-Joon move, not closer, just a slight shift in position, the sound of someone redistributing their weight. Still at the entrance. Still not performing anything. This one is the best piece in the installation, Ji-Hoon said. Why? The question surprised him. Not because it was inappropriate, but because it was the first time Kang-Joon had asked him anything beyond single-word responses. He considered it genuinely, the way the work deserved. Because it doesn't explain itself, he said. Everything else in here has a legible emotion. Grief, resilience, tension. You can name them in under 5 seconds. This one, he gestured slightly at the space between the two figures. You can't name it. You can only feel that the distance is chosen. That both figures could close it and haven't. And the sculpture doesn't tell you whether that's sad or right or both. He paused. Good art doesn't resolve. It just holds the question still long enough for you to look at it. He turned around then, because he'd said more than he intended to and wanted to see the face it had landed on. Kang-Joon was standing at the entrance with his hands in his pockets, and he was looking at Ji-Hoon with an expression that Ji-Hoon's considerable vocabulary could not immediately supply a word for. It wasn't admiration exactly. It wasn't surprise. It was something more careful than either. The expression of a person who has just encountered something they recognize and did not expect to find here, in this context, in this form. It lasted only a moment. Then Kang-Joon looked at the bronze sculpture, at the space between the two figures, and was quiet. Ji-Hoon looked at him looking at it. He realized he had just explained his interior life to a stranger using other people's art as the medium. And the stranger had stood at 4 meters distance and listened with that expression on his face, and Ji-Hoon did not have a word for any of it yet. He filed it, turned back to the 5th piece. There are 4 more, he said. I know, said Kang-Joon. And stayed. They ate lunch in the suite. This had not been discussed or decided. It had simply materialized, the way certain things did around Kang-Joon, through a sequence of small and unremarkable actions that added up to an arrangement without ever requiring negotiation. Ji-Hoon had returned from the gallery deck and found that Kang-Joon had ordered from the in-suite menu 2 separate selections and set them on the low table in the sitting area with the same unceremonious efficiency he applied to everything. No candles, no presentation, just food placed where it could be reached, with the expectation of nothing. Ji-Hoon sat in the chair nearest the window and ate and looked at the sea, which had shifted from morning pewter to a pale, washed-out blue as the cloud cover thinned. Kang-Joon sat in the other chair and ate and occasionally looked at whatever he was reading on his phone. Not scrolling, actually reading, which Ji-Hoon noticed because he noticed things and because it was marginally less unsettling than being looked at. They did not talk during lunch. It was not an uncomfortable silence. It was the silence of 2 people who had established, without formally establishing anything, that the absence of conversation was not a problem requiring solution. Ji-Hoon finished first. He set down his fork and became aware, with the particular sensitivity of someone who had been managing this information all morning, that the patch on his wrist had passed the point of marginal function and arrived somewhere considerably more exposed. He had changed it before leaving the suite, the spare he'd packed, which meant this was now the last one. And it was failing faster than it should have, stress and disrupted sleep accelerating the metabolic rate the way it always did when he didn't want it to. He pressed his fingers to it. Thin. Almost papery. The scent in the suite was going to become a problem. Not immediately, but within the hour. His own suppression weakening meant the ambient chemistry of the room would shift, and an alpha with Kang-Joon's sensitivity would register it long before Ji-Hoon could manage the fact politely. He was calculating how to remove himself to somewhere with better ventilation when he noticed that Kang-Joon had put down his phone. Not dramatically. He simply set it face down on the arm of the chair and looked at Ji-Hoon with the same steady, undecorated attention as always, and Ji-Hoon understood, with a cold and practiced precision, what was coming. The shift. The moment when an alpha's behavior reorganized itself around new information, when the restraint gave way to instinct and the space between them stopped being neutral. He set his shoulders. He kept his face arranged. He was very good at this part. Kang-Joon reached into the interior pocket of the jacket draped over the back of his chair. He placed something on the low table between them and slid it across with 2 fingers. Then he withdrew his hand, picked up his phone, and resumed reading. Ji-Hoon looked at the table. It was a suppressant patch, still sealed in its foil. A different brand than his own, better, actually, the kind that lasted longer and adhered more consistently under stress conditions. The kind that required either a prescription or access to the sort of medical network that most people didn't have casually. He stared at it. Kang-Joon did not look up from his phone, did not adjust his posture, did not perform patience or restraint or the particular brand of aggressive nonchalance that people deployed when they wanted credit for not wanting credit. He was simply reading, and the patch was simply on the table, and neither of these facts appeared to require Ji-Hoon's acknowledgement. "You brought those with you," Ji-Hoon said. "Yes. You travel with suppressant patches." Kang-Joon looked up briefly. "I travel to events where it's useful to have them. Sometimes Omegas on the guest list run short. It's considerate to be prepared." He looked back at his phone. "It has nothing to do with you specifically." This was, Ji-Hoon recognized, a very precise thing to say. It removed the transaction from the personal without being cold about it. It placed the patch in the category of practical provision rather than intimate knowledge, which meant accepting it required no renegotiation of what Ji-Hoon had disclosed or what Kang-Joon had observed. It was just a thing available in a room, like the tea that morning. He looked at the patch for a moment longer. "You could feel it fading," Ji-Hoon said. "Not a question." A pause. "Yes. Since when?" Kang-Joon considered this with his eyes still on his phone, which Ji-Hoon was beginning to understand was not rudeness, but a way of making conversations easier. "Eye contact withheld as a form of pressure removal." "Since the gallery," he said. "The second piece. The ceramic vessel. The kintsugi." Ji-Hoon had been standing very still in front of it, talking about honesty and repair, and his patch had been failing and Kang-Joon had been 4 meters away and had said yes with that particular weight and given no other indication. "You didn't say anything," Ji-Hoon said. "It wasn't my information to manage." Ji-Hoon looked at him. Kang-Joon met his eyes this time, briefly, just long enough for the statement to register as something meant to be received directly, and then he looked back at the phone. "You don't owe me anything for that," Kang-Joon said. His voice carried the same flat, accurate quality as everything else he said. No warmth performed, no distance performed, just the words doing exactly what words were for. Not explanation or gratitude or the story of why you manage it the way you do. None of that. The suite was very quiet. Ji-Hoon looked at the patch on the table. The foil caught the pale afternoon light through the window and held it dully. Around them the yacht moved through the water with its slow, deep rhythm. And somewhere in the corridor outside someone passed and was gone, and the suite returned to its particular silence. He thought about the figure with its hands covering its face. The practiced choice of what to show. The shoulders that knew the weight of the decision because they had carried it long enough for it to become posture rather than effort. He thought about Kang-Joon at 4 meters, listening, saying yes. He thought about the fact that in 30-something hours he would be off this yacht and back in the ordinary geometry of his life, where he managed everything in the careful, competent, exhausting way he had always managed everything, and no one would slide anything across a table without attaching a cost to it that would eventually be collected. He reached out and picked up the patch. He didn't say thank you. Kang-Joon had specifically structured the offer to make thank you unnecessary, and Ji-Hoon understood architecture well enough to respect it when he encountered it. He simply picked it up and turned it over in his fingers and looked at the brand name, which was indeed better than his own, and said nothing. Kang-Joon read his phone. The afternoon light moved across the floor of the suite in its slow, westward way, and Ji-Hoon held the patch in his closed hand for a long moment before he got up and went to apply it, and the suite held its quiet around both of them like something that had decided, without being asked, to stay. Before I tell you what happens next, subscribe to Starry-Eyed Lovers and tell me where you're watching from. The gathering had been on the itinerary since embarkation. Ji-Hoon had noted it in the packet. Evening social, stern deck, 1930, smart casual, with the mild intention of attending as a couple and the current reality of attending as neither. He had not decided whether to go. He had simply found himself, at 7:15, wearing the better of the 2 shirts he'd packed, and standing in the suite's entrance doing up his cuff buttons with the focused attention of someone who had run out of reasons not to do a thing. Kang-Joon was already dressed when Ji-Hoon emerged, dark jacket, no tie, the same unhurried quality he carried in all clothing. He looked at Ji-Hoon's shirt and said nothing, which Ji-Hoon was choosing to read as neither approval nor its absence. Just the neutral acknowledgement of a man who understood that people got dressed and went places, and this was one of those times. "You're going," Ji-Hoon said. "For a while. I'm also going." "I know," Kang-Joon said, and picked up his keycard. They did not discuss whether to arrive together or separately. They walked out of the suite at the same time and took the same corridor and the same stairs, and if this constituted an arrival together, neither of them named it as such. The stern deck had been arranged with the particular effort of a crew that knew how to create atmosphere without tipping into theater. Strings of warm light ran the perimeter. A small ensemble, guitar, bass, something with keys, was set up at the far end playing the kind of music that existed specifically to fill an outdoor evening space. Melodic, undemanding, present without insisting on attention. Perhaps 40 guests distributed themselves across the deck in the natural clustering patterns of people who didn't entirely know each other but were willing to pretend, for one evening, that they might. Ji-Hoon took a glass of something from the passing tray and positioned himself near the rail on the port side with the water behind him and the gathering in front, which was where he always placed himself at events, back to something solid, full view of the room. He had done this at every professional gathering and every social occasion for as long as he could remember, and he had never examined the habit, because examining habits told you things you sometimes weren't ready to know. He became aware of Seo-Yun approximately 4 minutes into standing there. He was across the deck with 2 people Ji-Hoon didn't recognize, laughing, relaxed, performing the version of himself that Ji-Hoon had once found magnetic and now simply recognized as a performance. He had not looked in Ji-Hoon's direction yet. Ji-Hoon did not adjust his position or his expression or the angle of his glass. He was very good at being looked at and looked through simultaneously, and he deployed this skill now with the efficiency of long practice. Kang-Joon materialized at his left shoulder. Not crowding, the same distance as the gallery, as the balcony, as every space they had shared. Close enough to be proximate. Far enough to be chosen. "He's watching now," Kang-Joon said low, without looking at Seo-Yun. "I know. Does it bother you?" Ji-Hoon considered this genuinely rather than reflexively. "No," he said, and found it was accurate. "It would have bothered me more if he wasn't." Kang-Joon was quiet for a moment. "That's honest. I'm always honest. I'm just usually quiet about it." The ensemble shifted into something slower. Not dramatically slower, just a half-tempo drop that changed the texture of the evening the way a key change changes a song. Several couples drifted toward the center of the deck, where the lighting was warmer and the spacing between guests had opened up just enough to move. Ji-Hoon watched them. He did not consider himself a person who danced at events. Not because he couldn't, but because dancing required a particular kind of willingness to be seen that he rationed carefully. You couldn't control how you looked when you were moving to music. Your body made decisions without consulting you. He found this acceptable only in contexts where he trusted the witness. He felt Kang-Joon turn slightly beside him. Not toward the dance floor. Toward Ji-Hoon. He didn't speak immediately. Ji-Hoon had noticed this about him. The space he left before words, not from hesitation but from the same deliberateness he applied to everything. The sense that what he said had been briefly held before being offered. When Kang-Joon spoke, it was because he had decided to, which made everything he said feel like a choice rather than a reflex. He extended his hand, palm up, at approximately the height of Ji-Hoon's elbow. Not reaching for anything. Just present, offered, waiting. Ji-Hoon looked at it. The hand was still. Not tense. Still, in the particular way that Kang-Joon was still, as though stillness were a decision he'd made early and recommitted to constantly. No performance in it. No angle working underneath the gesture. Just an open hand in the warm string light of the stern deck, extended toward Ji-Hoon with the same quality as everything else Kang-Joon had offered over the past day. Here, if you want it, and equally fine if you don't. Ji-Hoon thought about the bronze sculpture. Voluntary adjacency. 2 figures, their own weight, the chosen space between them. He placed his hand in Kang-Joon's. The contact was immediate and solid, and Kang-Joon's fingers closed around his with a pressure that was present without being possessive. The grip of someone who was holding something they understood was not theirs to keep. They moved toward the center of the deck and Ji-Hoon was aware of Seo-Yun watching from the port rail, aware in the peripheral, unimportant way of someone registering weather. And then he was aware of nothing except the music and the motion and the entirely unfamiliar sensation of being in a body that was not braced. Kang-Joon led without announcing it. This was the thing Ji-Hoon noticed first. The guidance came through weight and direction rather than instruction or adjustment, the way good leading always worked and so rarely did in practice. His hand at Ji-Hoon's back was placed at the correct distance from the spine and applied no pressure beyond what the movement required. Not a claim, a coordinate. They didn't speak. Ji-Hoon had expected to find silence during a dance uncomfortable. Silence required stillness of the face, and stillness of the face in close proximity felt like exposure in a way that conversation covered. But Kang-Joon was looking past Ji-Hoon's shoulder with that unfocused, inward quality he sometimes had, as if he were listening to something underneath the music, and the absence of eye contact was not absence at all, but simply another form of space offered freely. Ji-Hoon's left hand rested on Kang-Joon's shoulder. He became aware of it, not because the contact was wrong, but because it wasn't. Because his hand was there, on the dark fabric of a jacket belonging to a man he had met 30 hours ago, and his hand was not shaking. He checked. Quietly, internally, the way he checked the patch each morning. 2 fingers of awareness, a brief inventory. Not shaking. He could not remember the last time he had been touched in motion and been still inside it. He catalogued this the way he catalogued everything. Carefully, without immediate conclusion, filed under things requiring more time than he currently had. The song moved through its final measures. Kang-Joon slowed with it, and Ji-Hoon slowed with him. And when the music stopped, they separated with the same unremarkable ease as the other couples around them. Kang-Joon released his hand. Clean, complete, nothing held past the moment. From the port rail, Seo-Yun was no longer watching the middle distance. He was watching Kang-Joon with the specific expression of a person performing arithmetic they don't like the answer to. Ji-Hoon didn't look at him. He looked at the water beyond the stern, black now and lit by the yacht's wake, and felt his own hands hanging at his sides, warm, quiet, entirely steady. The squall arrived without much warning. There had been signs. Ji-Hoon had noticed them on the walk back from the stern deck. The way the wind had shifted from lateral to something more vertical, pressing down rather than across, and the way the water beyond the rail had lost its reflective quality and gone dark and matte. He had noted these things with the part of his mind that noted things automatically and filed them without urgency. And then he had followed Kang-Joon back inside and thought nothing more of it. By 10 o'clock the yacht was moving differently. Not dangerously. The vessel was large enough that the swells produced something closer to a long, slow lean than genuine turbulence, the kind of motion that was more disorienting than alarming. The announcement from the bridge was brief and professionally calm. Guests were advised to remain in interior spaces for the next 90 minutes while the weather system passed. The stern deck was closed. The upper observation lounge was closed. The corridors were empty in the particular way of spaces where everyone has made the sensible decision simultaneously. Ji-Hoon was not in the suite when it started. He had gone down to deck 2 after the gathering. Not for any particular reason, just the restlessness that sometimes followed social exposure, the need to move through a space alone and let his nervous system recalibrate. He had been standing in the empty gallery corridor looking at the bronze sculpture again. The one with the deliberate hands, after everything, still standing. When the yacht's motion changed beneath his feet and the corridor lights shifted to their lower evening setting and the announcement came through the speakers above him in 2 languages. He turned to go back up. Kang-Joon was at the end of the corridor. He had come looking, Ji-Hoon understood. Not dramatically, not with urgency, but with the same quiet purposefulness he brought to everything. He had noticed Ji-Hoon wasn't in the suite and had come to the place Ji-Hoon was most likely to be, which was either an observation about attention or about being known in some small and recent way, and Ji-Hoon didn't have the bandwidth to determine which. The upper stairs are locked out during weather events, Kang-Joon said. There's an interior route through the service corridor, but it takes longer. How long? 20 minutes, maybe. The deck motion is significant enough that they're not recommending it. Ji-Hoon looked at the corridor around them. The gallery space was small, the exhibition panels, 2 low benches, the sculptures in their lit alcoves. The corridor itself extended perhaps 15 meters, ending in a service door on one end and the stairwell on the other. There was a seating area at the far end near the porthole, 2 chairs, the kind of functional furniture placed in transitional spaces for the occasional guest who needed to sit down. They were, in practical terms, staying here for 90 minutes. Fine, Ji-Hoon said. They moved to the seating area. The porthole beside them showed nothing but dark water and rain moving sideways across the glass in long, fast diagonals. The yacht leaned into a swell and held for a moment before righting itself, and Ji-Hoon put one hand on the wall briefly, and then didn't need to. They sat in the 2 chairs. Kang-Joon looked at the porthole. Ji-Hoon looked at the middle distance and tried to identify what was happening to the air in the corridor and couldn't avoid the answer for longer than approximately 40 seconds. The patch. The better brand, the longer duration. It had been applied that afternoon under significantly better conditions than the original. But the evening had involved sustained proximity and the dancing and the particular compound effect of stress metabolizing faster than the adhesive could compensate for. He pressed his fingers to his wrist. Almost nothing. The realization arrived with the specific quality of something he had been managing toward the edges of his awareness all evening and could no longer manage. His suppression was gone, functionally, chemically, completely. The air in the enclosed corridor space was already different. He could feel it in the way his own body was responding, the warmth at the back of his neck, the heightened sensitivity in his fingertips, the particular clarity that a failing suppressant produced right before it stopped producing anything at all. He kept his face arranged. He kept his breathing even. He did both of these things with the concentration of someone performing a technical task that required full attention. Kang-Joon had gone very still. Not tense, still, in the way of something that has identified a situation and is making a series of rapid, invisible decisions about how to be inside it. Ji-Hoon watched him from the edge of his vision. He was waiting for the shift, the reorganization, the moment when alpha instinct overrode whatever Kang-Joon had established as his behavioral architecture. He had seen it happen faster than this in men with considerably less reason. Kang-Joon stood up. Ji-Hoon's hands closed on the arms of the chair. Not gripping, just contact, something solid under his palms. He watched Kang-Joon stand and waited for the direction of movement and calculated, with the trained efficiency of years, which part of the corridor gave him the most lateral space. Kang-Joon took 2 steps back. Not toward Ji-Hoon. Away. Deliberate, measured, 2 full steps that put the low bench between them and increased the distance in the corridor to something Ji-Hoon's nervous system registered immediately as different. He stood there with his hands at his sides and his jaw set in the way of someone exerting something that cost them, and he looked at Ji-Hoon directly. The air between them was charged in a way that had no polite name. It pressed against every surface of the corridor, and Ji-Hoon could feel it in his sternum, in the spaces between his fingers, in the specific and unwilling attentiveness of a body that had spent years being managed into silence and was now, without the chemistry to silence it, simply present. "Tell me what you want," Kang-Joon said. For words. Low, even stripped of everything except the question itself. No subtext working underneath them. No structure designed to make one answer easier than another. Just the question, offered with the same clean directness as the patch on the table, as the bolt specification, as the hand extended palm up at a stern deck gathering. Ji-Hoon stared at him. Nobody had asked. In 14 months with Seo-Yun, nobody had asked. In every dynamic he had navigated before that, the professional adjacencies, the careful distances, the relationships that had lasted until he became too much work. Nobody had held that much space and that much restraint and looked at him across it and asked what he wanted as though the answer were genuinely open. His throat was tight. Not with grief, with something older and more structural, the feeling of a wall discovering it is not load-bearing. He was trembling. He noticed this with some detachment. His hands on the chair arms, the slight unsteadiness of his own breathing. He noticed it and did not perform the management of it, which was itself something new. Kang-Joon waited. He did not move. He did not soften the question with reassurance or harden it with expectation. He just stood at his 2 steps of deliberate distance with the question still in the air between them, still open, still entirely Ji-Hoon's to answer. Ji-Hoon let go of the chair arms. He stood up. His legs were steady enough. He looked at Kang-Joon across the space between them, the bench, the charged air, the 2 full steps of distance that Kang-Joon had put there on purpose, and he took 1 step forward, not closing the distance entirely. Just 1 step. Just enough to make the answer legible. Kang-Joon's breath released, barely audible, barely anything but there. The first evidence Ji-Hoon had encountered of something costing him in real time. Outside the porthole, the rain moved sideways across the dark water. Inside, neither of them spoke. The corridor held its charged and careful air around them, and Ji-Hoon stood inside the choice he had just made and found that his hands, hanging at his sides, were no longer trembling. The Azure Dominion came into port the way large things always did, slowly, with the particular patience of something that understood its own weight. Ji-Hoon stood at the window of the main room and watched the dock resolve from a gray suggestion in the morning mist into something concrete. Cranes, concrete, the geometry of a working port softened at the edges by the hour and the light. It was early. He had been awake for some time before the harbor became visible. Had woken in the main room's bed for the second morning, the lamp off this time, having remembered to turn it off, which felt like a small and unremarkable form of progress. He had not seen Kang-Joon since the corridor. That was not precisely true. He had heard him return to the suite some time after they had made their way back from deck 2, had heard the quiet click of the adjoining door, had lain in the dark and listened to his own breathing until it steadied. But they had not spoken. The suite had held its silence around the fact of what had happened in the gallery corridor the way the sea holds things. Not concealing, just containing, giving everything its appropriate depth before the surface. He had thought about it with the careful, methodical attention he gave to objects in the museum that required extended looking before they yielded meaning. One step forward. Kang-Joon's breath releasing. The specific quality of a question that asked nothing except the answer. He was still thinking about it when the knock came at the adjoining door. "We dock in 40 minutes, Kang-Joon said through it. Not opening it, just his voice level and even the same as always. "I know," Ji-Hoon said. "I'm watching." A pause. "I'll make tea." Ji-Hoon listened to him move away from the door and felt something shift in his chest. Not dramatically, not with the declarative quality of a feeling announcing itself, but in the way of a tide. Quietly, completely, in only one direction. He got up and packed. It took 12 minutes, which was longer than it should have taken given how little he'd unpacked. But he moved slowly, folding each thing with attention, because the alternative was to rush, and rushing felt like the wrong register for this particular morning. He changed into fresh clothes. He applied the last suppressant patch, his own brand this time, from the emergency supply he hadn't needed to touch because of what Kang-Joon had slid across the table without comment 2 days ago. He pressed it to his wrist and held it for the required 30 seconds and thought about honesty and repair. When he opened the adjoining door, the tea was already on the table. They drank it standing this time, both of them at the window, watching the dock come closer. The harbor was busier than the early hour suggested. Crews moving, vehicles, the ordinary industry of a port that didn't wait for the light to finish arriving. The Azure Dominion reduced its speed to the particular crawl of final approach, and the water around the hull went from open sea to the darker, more complicated water of enclosed docks. "You have someone meeting you," Kang-Joon said. Not a question. He was looking at the dock with the same focused quality he brought to all observation. "No," Ji-Hoon said. "I'll get a car." Kang-Joon nodded, drank his tea. Ji-Hoon looked at his profile, the set of his jaw, the straight line of his nose, the unhurried quality that didn't change whether he was standing in a gallery or a yacht corridor or here, watching a port materialize through morning mist. He thought about 4 meters of distance in a gallery. He thought about 2 deliberate steps backward in a corridor, which had cost something, which Ji-Hoon had heard in one released breath. "Kang-Joon," he said. "Yes. Last night." He kept his eyes on the dock. "In the corridor." "Yes. I want to acknowledge it. Not manage it or explain it. Just acknowledge it happened." A pause. "All right. That's all," Ji-Hoon said. "That's what I wanted to say." Kang-Joon turned his head and looked at him with that expression. The one from the gallery, the one Ji-Hoon still didn't have a precise word for, that thing that lived between recognition and restraint. He looked at Ji-Hoon for a moment, and then looked back at the harbor, and Ji-Hoon understood that this too had been received correctly, without addition or reduction, filed in whatever careful architecture Kang-Joon maintained for things that mattered. The disembarkation process had the organized looseness of a vessel with a full passenger manifest and a crew that had done this many times. Guests were assigned windows by deck. Deck 6 went early. Ji-Hoon stood in the suite's entrance with his overnight bag, and Kang-Joon stood beside him, and neither of them had discussed walking out together. But when the clearance notification came through, they walked out together. In the corridor, They passed a couple from the evening gathering who nodded at them with the incurious recognition of people who had made their own private observations and reached their own conclusions. Ji-Hoon noted this and filed it under things he didn't have the energy to address. On the gangway, 3 levels above the dock, he saw Seo-Yun. He was standing to the side of the main passenger flow with his luggage. The structured carry-on, the weekend bag, the methodical packing of a man who had brought the correct amount of everything. And he was watching the gangway with the expression of someone waiting for a particular moment to arrive. When Ji-Hoon appeared, he straightened slightly, the way people do when they've rehearsed something and the cue has come. Then his gaze moved to the man beside Ji-Hoon. The rehearsal dissolved. Ji-Hoon watched it happen in real time. The recognition, arriving in stages, the way large information always arrived. Name first, then bloodline, then the full weight of reputation settling across Seo-Yun's face like weather. He knew who Kang-Joon was now. Someone had told him, or he had asked, or the ship's quiet passenger network had delivered it in the way of all information that travels without being sent. He stood on the gangway with his methodical luggage and understood, in this moment, the complete arithmetic of what he had done 2 days ago in a cabin on Deck 5 and the number it produced. Kang-Joon did not look at him. He was carrying Ji-Hoon's overnight bag, had taken it at the suite entrance without asking, the same way he refilled cups and slid things across tables, because it was available to be done and he was there to do it. And he walked down the gangway beside Ji-Hoon with the unhurried quality of a man who had nowhere to be except exactly here. He did not announce himself. He did not perform. He simply walked. Ji-Hoon did not look at Seo-Yun either. He kept his eyes on the dock below and felt the gangway solid under each step and the morning air on his face, and the particular quality of moving through a space without bracing against it. They reached the dock. The crowd moved around them with the purposeful scatter of disembarkation. Kang-Joon set the bag down at Ji-Hoon's feet and stood for a moment, and the morning held them both in its gray and ordinary light. "One dinner," Kang-Joon said. "Somewhere that doesn't require anything from either of us." Ji-Hoon looked at him. "That's a vague criterion. I'll find somewhere specific. I just need to know if the criterion is acceptable." The corner of Ji-Hoon's mouth moved, barely fractionally, a thing that was almost a smile and knew it. "The criterion is acceptable." Kang-Joon held out his phone, screen facing Ji-Hoon, the new contact field open. No name pre-filled. Just the empty space waiting. Ji-Hoon took the phone. He typed his number and his name, his actual name, not the shortened version he gave to people he wasn't sure about, and handed it back. Kang-Joon looked at it for a moment. "Put the phone away." "I'll be in touch," he said. "I know," Ji-Hoon said, and found that he meant it without reservation, which was the most unfamiliar feeling he had encountered in recent memory, and also, he was discovering, not frightening. Kang-Joon picked up his own bag. He turned to go, no extended goodbye, no performance of the parting, and Ji-Hoon watched him move through the crowd with that unhurried, unannouncing quality, taking up exactly the space he occupied and no more. Behind him, somewhere on the gangway, Seo-Yun was still standing with his methodical luggage and his arithmetic. Ji-Hoon picked up his bag. He turned in the opposite direction, toward the car rank at the edge of the dock, and walked into the ordinary morning with steady hands and the unexamined, careful, entirely new sensation of someone who had, without planning it, allowed something to remain unresolved. Not from avoidance, but from the first genuine willingness, in a very long time, to wait and see.